All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today to celebrate World Toilet Day amongst this historic, hectic time that we're all living through. We're really excited to have this time and space to really focus on women in the sanitation economy, particularly in this time. As you know, we all know, COVID-19 has rocked our health systems, our economies, our status quo. And I think that, across society, it's really shined a light on the deeply rooted inequities that are pervasive throughout a lot of our organizations, our structures, and the way that we've been moving through the world. So I'm really looking forward to kind of unpacking some of that based off of some of our the expertise of some of our esteemed panelists here. I do want to also frame that we're going to be covering a lot of ground. We're going to be talking about menstruation in the workplace. We're going to be talking about representation within sanitation businesses and at large, inclusive workplaces and what that looks like now and what it could look like in the future. And yeah, just really about how we can collectively start coming together, having some of these important conversations to talk about how to drive sustainable and inclusive change within the sanitation economy. So I'm Jasmine Burton. I am the Innovation Lab manager for the Toilet Board Coalition. This is our inaugural year of the Women in the Sanitation Economy Innovation Lab, which has been an incredible experience that I think Pete will speak to a little bit more on behalf of Kimberly Clark. And I'm really excited to be here today with Kim from Flush. We have Mary from the Iris Group. We have Ida from WaterAid, and then we have Pete from Kimberly Clark. And so we're going to be covering, again, a lot of ground and looking forward to getting into this discussion. So let's start off with you, Ida. Could you tell us briefly about your experience founding the African Women Sanitation Professional Network, specifically as a woman of color in the wash sector?
Thank you very much, Jasmine. And hello, everyone. Really nice to be out here on World Toilet Day and having this conversation with, the other ladies on the call. And I, like you rightly say, the inequalities that, exist in our sector and particularly how that affects women. It's gross. We all know about it. We know the statistics. We know the data. We know how it presents. But I work for WaterAid as Senior Wash Manager, Sanitation. That means I am responsible for our work around sanitation, supporting country programs, and providing strategic orientation to our work. And in that space, it means I have to also engage with a number of people and organizations outside of WaterAid. And whilst I have a relatively, decent space and platform to thrive and to grow within WaterAid, I find that once it comes to external engagement, sometimes I notice I'm the underdog, one for so many reasons. But then specifically why I co-founded this organization with some other ladies was, first of all, we were attending the network of, a platform of knowledge and learning and knowledge management platform. And on that platform, because of the role I had, I sat at the coordinating table. And on that table, very quickly, once I started engaging from 2015, when I took up the role in the UK here, I started engaging, I noticed very quickly that I was very different from everyone in the room. Not just I was a woman of color, I was, in fact, at a point, the only woman of color sitting down there, but then there were very few women. And even in that space, when we talked, there wasn't a lot of space, to really speak up because of the attitude of the men in the room. I mean, bless them, they're all like really decent men, and it's not something they're aware of, but just not having that space to engage was one of the things that really sparked this. And so we decided, okay. And when I started to voice this out, I'm like, this doesn't seem very representative, particularly the conversation about all of this knowledge management, all of this brilliant work that's been done here is most input comes from the global north. Where is the voice from the global south on this? And where are the women, on this platform as well? And then there were quick responses, and I give credit to that organization, that platform. Very quick responses began to also bring on board other women. And so the co-founder of this network with myself was one of the young women that was brought on board. to begin to work together. And then the conversation started where we look different. They don't hear us well. They don't understand where we're coming from, because sometimes you're speaking from lived experiences, and that's not something someone who hasn't lived that experience can relate with and can value. So we decided to, start this organization or this network to bring African women together as a collective, convene, organize, strategize, and be very clear about how we engage not only on the African continent, but globally, and especially shifting the narrative in the global north about what sanitation should look like in the global south from the pure perspective of women. And we're targeting and working with women professionals. That means someone who has some experience, some expertise in sanitation, and can and is willing and has a passion to contribute and shape how sanitation develops on the continent. And very recently, we've been very inspired by Kamala Harris's a very popular quote now saying, "We may be the first," because some of the women we're working with are definitely the first in whatever space and spheres they are in, but we certainly won't be the last. So it's very timely that we're having this conversation. I just want to open us up on that, and there's more information about the network. Thank you.
Yes. No, thank you so much, Ada. I really appreciate that. I mean, I think it's so important to kind of shine a light on the aspects of community, collective building. There needs to be space for, underrepresented voices to congregate, to speak, to talk about, how we can climb and how we can, be more represented in these spaces. And so I think, the work that you're doing is fantastic, and it's pioneering a lot of, it's going to open a lot of doors for more people to kind of find their leadership potential within the sector, which, is there. It's just now a matter of like amplifying and increasing access in the pipeline. So really fantastic and inspiring work that y'all are doing. And so, I would love to transition to you, Kim, to hear a little bit about your experience. So, as a female founder yourself, I'm keen to learn more about your journey, as well as, your work related to increased inclusion and intersectional representation in the WASH sector. And if you could give us a brief overview of that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And I'm so excited to talk about this on World Toilet Day, because it makes me happy that we're talking about women. And hopefully there's a lot of men listening as well, because we want it to be equitable across the board. So I started Flush rather recently. It's a rather new company, partly with the purpose similar to what Edo was talking about. I just felt like I didn't belong, not necessarily because I'm a woman, but partly just because of how I think about the sector and systems change sometimes. I come from a business background. I'm not an engineer, but I definitely look at the people's systems and try to think about how can we improve those. And I've come in different sectors as well. And, I'm passionate about water and sanitation and really want to see it grow and become the powerful sector that it can be, which is why I started Flush. So Flush provides partly edutainment to the public to really destigmatize conversations about sanitation, but also we provide advisory services to really help improve the internal management systems in sanitation in particular, because we think that a lot of the pain points is just the management systems sometimes are kind of ad hoc, and it would be nice to figure out how to make better, more efficient, well-managed machines, which will also help contribute to a more equitable workplace and a more human approach, I think, to how we manage sanitation. So, I am a female founder, and I do think sometimes it can be tricky to really get people to be convinced they should listen to me as maybe an expert and as potentially a thought leader. I find sometimes I hear that they think I'm a young girl, even though I'm in my mid-30s, and I'm like, please don't ever call me a girl. I stopped being that a long time ago, and trying to figure out what do we have to do to actually, increase our status and our ability to have a say as leaders without getting stuck in some adjectives that are seen as stigmatized and unpleasant and often stereotyped on women. So one of the things that I've been doing with Flush is we started a research project to look at inclusion in the workplace for sanitation specifically. So really what we want to know is, what does leadership look like in sanitation? What is the demographics? So we talk a lot about inclusion and program implementation in sanitation and why we want to reach everyone with sanitation systems, but I've never really understood why we focus just on the programs and not on the teams themselves and the leadership teams. I think it's really hard to have inclusion on the ground when the teams that are running the programs aren't necessarily representative of the people that they're serving. So, and also we also know that we have a lot of pain points in the sector about innovation, about having financial viability, and the data that McKinsey and Deloitte have put out over and over again, and the Harvard Business Review have put out, is that more inclusive teams will always be outperforming teams that are not inclusive. So there's this general story that we tell ourselves in the sanitation sector that really is led by the sector is run by a bunch of white guys somewhere, and basically we wanted to test that, see what that actually looks like. What is the makeup of the leadership in the sector? So that means board members, leadership teams, country directors. We didn't really focus on academics. We really want to focus on just practitioners, because academics is kind of a different rodeo in some senses. And we're still collecting the data. We've collected most of it. And I have a great team of women that are working on this with me from University of Leeds, and a bunch of friends in the sector who are curious. And I ran some numbers. They're very preliminary. They're probably going to change. But I thought I would just kind of give an insight of what we're at right now. So what we're seeing is that about a little over 60% of the sector is the sector's leaders are men. And if we break that up further, about 40% of them are men who are white. So we kind of divide it up as people who are white and people who are BIPOC, or that's Black, Indigenous, people of color. So we did BIPOC and white, and female and male. So 40% are white men, 27% are white women, and 22% are men of color, and then only 11% are women of color. And if we look at the age breakdown, it's even more interesting, because we see the older age groups of leaders tend to be a lot more white male dominated. But as the age groups get younger, we find it a little more gender equitable. So interestingly, the group of professionals who are leaders who are under the ages of 35, it's actually more women that are leaders, or at least white women in particular. But again, we're seeing that women of color are underrepresented in the leadership world. So while we're talking about we need to have more women in leadership teams in the sector, we also need to make sure that it's not just white women. It needs to be women of color who are represented. I think, there's a lot of conversations to be had about this, in particular, having these conversations that are hard about decolonization, and how do we make sure that women of color are represented better. Maybe that means passing on leadership roles to be more equitable. And also when we think about leadership, and this is kind of something that Flush is thinking about, how do we support the work going forward after we do this research, is, looking at leadership, it's not just about the hiring practices, but it's actually about creating an environment that is equitable. So making sure you have policies in place in organizations that are equitable for women and people of color and women of color. So making sure you have like anti-racism policies, maternity leave policies, and making sure that, when you are creating an inclusive team, that people are able to feel respected and like they're fairly treated, that they have a sense of belonging, but also have the confidence to speak out when something's not going right. And I think that's something the whole world is struggling with right now. And we're starting to see that this is an issue, but I'm really excited to see us change as a sector and really be able to help us create this more equitable environment for everybody, so that we have this really diverse group of leaders that can actually drive the sector forward at a much faster clip than we have been going.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thank you so much for that, Kim. I mean, I think, as an entrepreneur myself that's working to amplify and support the pipeline of representation within the space myself, I think all the points that you've raised are really true to the experiences that I've seen personally as well as professionally. And I mean, I think kind of in light of this year, I would be remiss to say, we're in a time of racial reckoning. We're in a time of, a civil rights era where we're really we have to be intentional about how we're, emerging from this time, so that we're not, exacerbating inequities that have already been around, and so that we can actually move forward. So I really appreciate some of the preliminary analyses, and I think really looking forward to the final findings for everything, because I think that's super important for the sanitation sector and the world at large. And I think you mentioned some points too, kind of about you know, current leadership representation, kind of age brackets. And I know for me personally, it's been, you know, essential to have, you know, male sponsors, you know, white women sponsors and mentors that enable and support me in my journey. And I know that that's been, you know, something that has, you know, been crucial for my development. And I think, you know, transitioning to Pete, you know, I've had the honor of working with him in the capacity of the accelerator program, and now in this innovation lab where we're specifically focusing on early stage women-led entrepreneurs within the sanitation economy. So Pete, if you could speak to, you know, why you individually, as well as Kimberly Clark at large, are so invested in supporting, you know, a generative, inclusive sanitation economy ecosystem for women entrepreneurs.
Yeah, Jazz. Hey, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I feel really humbled and honored to be with these other leaders to talk about such an important topic. Yeah, you know, my name is Pete Dulcamara, and first and foremost, I'm a husband and father. I've got 2 kids in college, and my wife and I live here in Neenah, Wisconsin. And, you know, when my wife became pregnant for our first child in December 1997, I wrote this personal mission statement, which is to help create businesses that improve people's lives and help raise children that live a life fulfilled. And I feel so fortunate to work for a company like Kimberly Clark, whose mission is so similar, which is to lead the world in essentials for a better life. And what is more essential than sanitation? And what is sanitation? You know, at the end of the day, what sanitation is really all the water that comes into your life. You want, you know, fresh, pure, clean water coming into your, you know, body. And it's all the water that leaves your life, right? All the waste. And we want that to be handled in a way to protect people from infection and disease. And so that's what the sanitation economy is all about. And the reason why women entrepreneurship is so important, and quite frankly, why minority entrepreneurship is so important, is I don't know if you've seen the World Economic Forum data that shows that it's going to take almost 100 years to close the gender gap on planet Earth, and that is totally unacceptable. You know, if we could go from the Earth to the moon in less than a decade, why can't we achieve social justice and gender equality by 2030 or even sooner? I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot of scientific research or some big breakthrough. I mean, if you want to change the world, all you have to do is change your mind. And that's really what we're talking about, is how do we really connect with people in a really empathetic way and understand their needs and really drive this. I keep talking about how do we, you know, a rising tide lifts all boats, not just yachts. You know, how do we really, you know, ride that wave, you know? And one of the things I talk about at KC all the time is who wants to be a billionaire? Who out there wants to be a billionaire? And I'm here to tell you, every single person listening to this right now can be a billionaire. If we stop defining a billionaire as somebody who accumulates $1 billion and start describing it as somebody who helps 1 billion people, we have an opportunity to help 1 billion people and give 1 billion people access to sanitation, to lift up 1 billion women who own their own business, you know, lift up, you know, 1 billion minorities around the world, you know, and create Black millionaires and Black billionaires. You know, just in the United States, if we could close the racial wealth gap in the United States, it would add over $1 trillion to the GDP. So, you know, Jazz, you know, from a Kimberly Clark perspective, you know, we're really focused on women entrepreneurship. Our Kotex brand is really focused on, you know, ending the stigma associated with menstruation, you know, giving girls access to education, you know, empowering women, and being a part of really solving the UN SDG goal around gender equality. And that's really our focus. And if you look at the history of Kimberly Clark, you know, if you think about our products, they're really products that help people when they've lost control of their life in areas that are socially taboo. You know, when a 10-year-old girl enters puberty, she's lost control. You know, when a mom and dad come home with their baby for the first time, they've lost control. When somebody becomes incontinent, they've lost control. If you've got a child that has bedwetting, they've lost control. And in every case, Kimberly Clark has stepped forward with solutions in a socially, taboo area with a lot of social stigma to give people control of their life. And that's what we're looking to do here is how do we give women control of their life? How do we give minorities control of their life? How do we lift up all people? So that's really the focus. That's really the intent. And again, Jazz, thanks for letting me be a part of this conversation today.
Yes, no, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure hearing from you. And I mean, I think it's something that I feel like it sometimes sounds like a broken record, but you know, gender equity is not just a women's issue; it's everyone. And I love the fact that Pete, that you're willing and able to shed a light on that, because I think sometimes it is very sort of women speaking to women, but it is like we're all in this together. When we're talking about menstruation, we're talking about life course events like incontinence, like this touches all of us. And so we all need to be able to speak to it and talk about how to, build better, be better. So really appreciate that. And I think that energy is what is driving and is sort of enabled the Women in the Sanitation Economy Innovation Lab that we kicked off with the Toilet Board this year, where we have 5 incredible early stage or mostly early stage entrepreneurs that are women, and they are representing the diversity within the sanitation economy, and looking at what it looks like to sort of build community, like Ada mentioned, like where are the spaces that early stage entrepreneurs, particularly women that might not be as networked, where can you go, like where are the resources for you, and also how can you learn from one another. And so I think we're piloting that. We're piloting also kind of how that can feed into our larger flagship accelerator program, and sort of seeing how that can help feed into the diversity as we continue growing that program. So thank you so much, Pete, for that. And I think now I would love to circle back to you, Ada, to hear a bit more about WaterAid's work in Nigeria as it relates to sanitation workers, as well as in South Asia. Oh, I think you might be muted.
Yes, I am muted. Thank goodness for the camera that is on. Yeah. So yes, our WaterAid, like we set ourselves up within the strategic period up to 2022. We're currently reviewing our strategy, but within the current strategy, we're very, very clear about addressing inequalities, and so that's one of our aims. And what that means is, across the board in all of our intervention, water, sanitation, and hygiene, we're obliged to take a gendered lens to everything we do. So with that, there's specific activities and projects and researches that we've been engaged in, mostly more formative research that we've been engaged in, trying to understand the presentations of inequalities and how we address them, especially as it relates also, seeing it from a gendered perspective and how it relates to women in particular. And so I'll just give a very specific example, like our program in Nigeria, we kind of, I would dare to say to some extent, set to pioneer market-based sanitation in Nigeria in a context at the time, and in a context where everything and everyone was talking about was community-led to sanitation. There's really no space for market. So with some grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that enabled us to venture into the space of learning about market-based sanitation and bringing that conversation into the national platforms and trying to influence others with it. And very specifically within that, we kind of, the way the program was modeled, we used community-based approaches to mobilize people, but then knew very quickly also from research that we had conducted that people did not really, the uptake wasn't as we had anticipated, because one of the biggest challenge was people felt the kind of toilets that were being realized through these community-based approaches were not what they had hoped for a toilet. And these are people who didn't have a toilet before, but they certainly knew what kind of toilet they wanted. And therefore, from an aspirational perspective, it wasn't cutting it. And Nigerians, being who they are, very proud people, would rather, people said clearly to us, would rather continue to defecate in the open than have the kind of toilet that person has. I would not, undignify myself to use a toilet like that. So we the market-based approach came in to begin to address the supply side issues. How do we come up with aspirational toilets that meet the needs of the people, and how do we get them to also have toilets that are sustainable and they can continue to enjoy and in a lasting manner. So we started to work with a category of entrepreneurs that you normally find in Nigeria. They call the concrete block producers. These are like the local builders in communities here and there. Began to organize them and set them up as sanitation businesses. And along with that, using very iterative processes and human-centered design principles, began to also talk to them about, checking with communities and the users, what product do you really want? Since we realized aspiration was a key driver of access in Nigeria. And in that space, so there were a couple of men initially, but it's grown very quickly. And then because of our focus on, gender and also on inequalities, we also saw that clearly young women who were involved in this business. Mind you, this is typically an area and an arena that men play in Nigeria. You find very few concrete block producers that are women. But I'm very happy to say that within our program, through that targeting, and tell the story of a young woman called Amara, who lives in Enugu, finished her basic school certificate qualifications, no job to do, nothing to do. She was just loafing around, and she visited a friend who worked in a concrete block producing factory. And she began to ask, she started off by buying and selling stuff, going to Lagos and buying, taking back to the suburban Enugu, and it wasn't cutting it. And she said, how does this work? And she started to learn from there, how much would I need to invest in it? When we hear such stories, we quickly pick them up and try to support their work and grow them in that light. So that's how we kind of deliberately target women and bring them into spaces that are traditionally male focused or male dominated, and then they thrive. As I speak to you, Amara goes from not just Enugu right now, she goes to provide toilet building services to other places other than Enugu. I had a chat with her just this weekend to say, look, I'm going to be talking about this issue. How are you doing? How's your business? And she was like, oh, auntie, I'm doing very well. Actually, I just came back from Benue, another state, where I went to install toilets in the family. I'm like, what else? This is just a living proof that the approach we take works. Same thing in Mozambique. We've worked with women, and not only as concrete block producers, but as marketers. So working on the chain, people who are promoting sales, door-to-door agents. We have a number of women that are going around talking about this and, getting commission for every toilet that is built and constructed out of the sales that they've tried to negotiate. So we're focusing on those levels as well, and they're looking to step it up. And if I can just throw in at this point, also in Zambia, with the African Women Sanitation Professionals Network, we're working very closely with entrepreneurs, people who are working on different levels at on the sanitation chain. So pit emptiers in Burkina, we have the stories of pit emptiers that are women, people engaging that. We're looking to also support them, with the access to right information, access to right capacity, enhancing their capacity, and see how we can link up with others, because basically what we do at the African Women Sanitation Network is kind of like brokering this relationship, since we can't do all of it. So that's part of it. And one last thing I see, time is going, but I just have to mention, very importantly, on the sanitation workers. We're finding also, particularly in Asia, our team in India kind of did further analysis on the issues of sanitation workers and in the context of COVID, and realized that during this COVID season, women that are on the sanitation, that are described as part of the sanitation workers description, so to say, we find that the way they've been affected by the pandemic is even greater. It's even way worse off, because most of them are in the very informal leg of the sanitation workers continuum, if you want to call it that. So they are the very informal levels. That means they don't have access to the kind of support that the men in the more formal structured utilities work would have, because their work is often not recognized or not organized enough, and they don't have access to the right information to protect themselves. Incomes are quickly lost. And I can go on with a myriad of the kind of things that are emerging from this research in terms of how it's affecting them. But as an organization, we're keeping a very, very clear focus on that, and hoping to work through program design in some ways to highlight these issues more and prefer solutions and responses that can address the challenges that they face. Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you so much for that, Ada. I think you covered a lot of things. I mean, I think, the concept of using human-centered design as a method, as a tool for, innovating in a way that's inclusive and actually innovating in a way that's being a steward of your resources is an incredible point. I'm a designer myself, and so that's like a part of my ethos. But I do think it's important to note that human-centered, usually, the archetype for human is often male. And so what does that mean when you're creating products and services? Like making sure that you have that intentional inclusive lens, particularly for, women and, other marginalized communities. And so I think, really, really happy that you brought that point up. And I think too, kind of the point about sanitation workers in general, I think, COVID has shown, time and time again that women are often on the front lines of the health and hygiene pandemic, right? And so you're being exposed to, the pathogens at a higher rate. The health outcomes are, there's adverse health outcomes as a result of this, particularly skewing towards women. And so, how can we create systems that protect people that are essential workers? And I think, there's the periods and pandemic movement that's talking about, again, like period supply chains being disrupted in the COVID time, as well as, again, women on the front lines that don't have access to menstrual products during this, as they're serving on the front lines of the pandemic. So I think there's so many pieces of it that, thank you so much for shining a light on all of that, Ada. I think really appreciate that.
Thanks, Jasmine.
Yes, awesome. So now I would love for us to transition beyond specifically the sanitation sector or the sanitation economy specifically. And I think, it would be fantastic to hear from you, Mary, about Wash Pals and the IRIS group and your work related to menstrual health in the workplace. I think, that'd be fantastic.
Great. No, I'd love to. And thanks for inviting me on World Toilet Day. So many of the things that you all have talked about already, issues around women, giving women control of their lives, in particular, lifting up women. When we think about that, so much of that is related to, can women actually do their jobs in a comfortable way, in a way that allows them to continue working even when they have their period, which, even in the US, a lot of women will find that it's difficulties managing their period and continuing to work. There was a study about the State Department, a survey of State Department, U.S. State Department women, and they said they lost, if they got their period without, unexpectedly, and they didn't have supplies in their desk, they would lose an average of an hour trying to get outside, come back in through security, but going out to purchase things. I mean, it's crazy. It affects everyone. So a lot of the work that had been done on menstrual hygiene management was coming out through looking at how do we keep girls in school once they have their period, and that opened up people's eyes to also, hey, what happens to these girls? We're giving them pads and reusables during their schooling years, and then they leave school, they go to the workforce. What's there? There's nothing for them. Are we assuming that they just figure it out by then? You're 16, 18, however old you are when you hit the workforce, and you're in a factory that there's no way for you to leave the line, the manufacturing line or whatever. So researchers, including Mari Summer and Bethany Caruso from Columbia University and Emory, who started raising this issue up and saying, we need to be taking a look at what happens to, how do we make it easier for women to manage their periods in the workplace. And because of that, USAID approached its Wash Pals project, which is the water sanitation and health partnerships and learning sustainability initiative. Mouthful, so we call it Wash Pals. And under the Wash Pals project, we're given latitude to do research and develop partnerships and try and figure out how do we crack some of these compelling issues in the wash space. It's been fascinating with this. They asked us to, is there, not even to make a business case, but is there a business case to be made for improving or making adequate menstrual hygiene management available in the workplace? So, do women have women-friendly toilets? Is there a shelf in the toilet area for them to put their pads on? Do they have access to pads? Do they have access to other things? If they're using reusable menstrual products, is there an area that's private for them to wash out the fabric and maybe either store it or dry it or whatever? Is there privacy in the toilet stalls? So much of what WaterAid has done around women-friendly toilets and many other organizations who've shown us the ways to do assessment. India has great women-friendly toilets where there are so many models. And what we're trying to do is bring this into the private sector. So we're working with carpet factories in Nepal, 2 small carpet factories, Shangri-La Carpets and a second one. And these are Nepalese companies. And in Kenya, we're working with Kenyan companies, 2 cloth factories, Thika Cloth Mill, and then a second company that just joined. We have about 800 women in those combined workplaces. And over the course of a year, we're working with the companies to develop programs that are around providing products, making menstrual hygiene products available in the workplace. So sanitary pads, reusable kits, menstrual cups in places where they're interested, as well as putting in those small changes to the infrastructure. So if it needs a shelf, if it needs privacy, encouraging the private sector company owners to improve, and they've been great, stepping up and saying, oh, we didn't know we needed to do this, so tell us. And you go through an assessment and wow, they're thrilled to know what to do. And so working on that kind of product and infrastructure area, we're also working with them on information, education, knowledge for the women as well as for men in the factories. And it's a little bit different in both countries on how you approach that. In Kenya, the women workers actually said, we want to be involved in designing any information education program that you're doing with men because we want to guide that. It's a very sensitive issue. They don't want to be seen as less than in the workplace. And so that's been fascinating. And then as well as in Nepal, there is more of a tradition of joint communication around some of these things. So it's a fascinating way to try and crack that second piece, which is around workplace culture and stigma. What is it that's driving women to stay home on average 2 days a month in a lot of lower income countries? So they're missing 2 days of work a month. That has implications for their own income. It has implications for the factory or the employer. They're missing part of their workforce. I mean, on average, among women of reproductive age, 1 out of 4 is having their period on any given day. And if you've got you've got women missing 2 days a month, you've got a lot of people coming in and out of your factory when you really like to have all of them there all the time because that improves your bottom line. And then the third component that we're working with the companies on is the workplace culture, workplace policies. So doing some of the work, Kimberly, that you talked about, looking at human resource policies, looking at menstrual leave policies. Are there ways in which just things as simple as, do supervisors feel as if it's okay to give women maybe a longer toilet break if they need it? Maybe they could stay in the workplace. They could stay at work if they were allowed to go lay down for 30 minutes while the medicine worked to take away some of the cramps. So looking at all of those things and ways in which we can make it easier for women to manage their periods. It's great. It's been a really interesting product initiative. And then the last thing I have to say about it, though, is that as far as how do we make the business case or find out if there's a business case, because I look at it and say, well, maybe this is a great investment. Maybe it makes sense for companies to make pads available and invest in these things. But I also recognize that business owners have a limited pot of money. And you're choosing between where do you invest? Are you putting it into on-site childcare? Are you putting it into improving your toilets? What are those things? I mean, we always have to be cognizant of the limitations that companies have. And is this instead something that should be done by governments? Is there a social argument for this? Just like we agree that, companies, of course, are going to provide toilet paper in the bathrooms. Do they also provide pads, or is it something that the government subsidizes? So we're looking at all of these things, and to do that, we're doing a cost-benefit analysis, which takes a look at the financials. So what are changes in absenteeism rates, presenteeism, productivity, as well as some of these social costs, or, well, we're costing out things that are non-market variables, right? Like stigma, employee satisfaction, some of these softer issues. So stay tuned. We're collecting data, we're measuring throughout the course of the year, and we're monetizing some of our non-market priced concepts or variables.
Awesome. Yeah, no, thank you so much for that, Mary. I think it's so fascinating to hear the depth and breadth of the work that y'all are doing. I'm from Atlanta, so I deeply admire Dr. Caruso's work in the gender equity space in sanitation. So really fantastic to hear that she's a part of this, this incredible work. And I think too, you touched on a bunch of things in terms of, people kind of having flexible expectations in terms of bathroom breaks, and kind of this going beyond sort of just offering period products or existing period products, which I think sometimes people are like, oh, we have pads available, so therefore, menstrual health has sort of been covered. And it's, like you mentioned, so many other dimensions of, menstrual health in the workplace, and what does it mean to be productive? What does it mean to be able to do your job to the fullest extent? And if you do have things like endometriosis, like, do you have a flexible, supervisor that enables and recognizes that that is something that's debilitating, and that will sort of iterate and change how you work? I also have recently spoken with someone from the Menstrual Health Hub, and she sort of challenged, the sector to say, currently when we're looking at products that exist for menstrual health, they exist to either collect or absorb. And, we live in a world where there's so many technologies. So, what about the product innovation? So I do think like there's so many pieces of what you're doing that is just fantastic, and it sort of challenges the status quo, the norm of, we added some pads in the bathroom, therefore everyone is kind of covered. So yeah, really looking forward to seeing the results of your analysis, and working further with you all on that end. And I think on a related note, it would be great to conclude by hearing from Pete about workplace culture. I know Kimberly-Clark has consistently, won awards for being one of the best places for women, mothers, and fathers to work. So from your perspective, could you speak to us about, inclusive workplace cultures, and, how that supports diverse pipelines for leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, at KC, as we look to ever improve, diversity, inclusion, and equity, it really starts with our D&I vision, which is to look, think, and behave like the people that use our products. And if you think about the people that use our products, I mean, that's everybody. I mean, Scott toilet paper, Huggies diapers, Kleenex tissue, Kotex feminine hygiene products. And so it really starts there. And the other thing we recognize is that nearly 80% of all our products are purchased by women. Whether the products are for men or women, 80% of our products are purchased by women. And so, I think what underlies everything that we do at Kimberly-Clark, I could wrap it up in one word, and that word is care. At KC, we really focus on, care for our consumers, care for our people, and care for our planet. And caring really starts with empathy. And somebody mentioned, human-centric design thinking. And even, when we design our products, it starts with, hey, we need to have an empathetic understanding of the consumer, and we need to prototype, and we need to get her feedback, and we iterate till we get to the product that's going to best fit her needs. Well, we do that in the workplace as well. When we think about changing the workplace of the future, it starts with an empathetic understanding of the employee, and understanding what the employee's needs are, and prototyping ideas, and getting feedback, and iterating to solutions that best fit the needs of the employees to support the business. And so I think those awards, I mean, they're great, but they're really indicative of just KC's philosophy that really starts with care, and all care starts with empathy. And we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We should listen twice as much as we talk, and getting that feedback and having that drive everything that we do at Kimberly-Clark, I think, is really the secret behind our success.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think We're going to do a rapid sort of round of kind of last thoughts. I would love to hear sort of, as we've mentioned time and time again, this has been a year of a lot of reckoning, a lot of thought, a lot of challenge, to sort of be future facing. So what would you all say kind of is the future of women in the sanitation economy, or what would you like it to look like? So kind of a provocation to end on that hopefully is generative and inspiring as we continue to do this hard work of gender equity within the sanitation economy. So whoever wants to go first, just final reflections on that.
Well, this is Mary. I'll go ahead since I was the last one to talk, right? Close out menstrual hygiene. When I look at it, and as we're working with sourcing our products, because in both countries, in Nepal and Kenya, we wanted to go with locally produced products. And what we're finding is that there are more women who are involved, women entrepreneurs who are involved in the reusable sector. So producing reusable menstrual hygiene cloths and bags and other innovations, things like that. But there are fewer women involved in producing disposables. And so when I look at that, I think, wow, the market, it's more lucrative to be in disposables. There are lots of things. You also need a higher level of business acumen because you're dealing with importing different products, inputs into the production of menstrual pads and things like that. So when I look at what would I like to see later on, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, I hope, I'd really love to see more women entrepreneurs in this space. I love the men that are doing the work, that are doing the hard work to produce like environmentally friendly, biodegradable pads in Nepal. But then I think, wow, these are products that women are using every day. Let's get men and women producing them together. So that would be my vision.
I'll go next. I think the big future for me is kind of what we've been talking about, getting more equitable and diverse leadership in the sector. I think that's the future of the world, but I think it's also the future of sanitation. It has to be. And I think really when we talk about making our organizations more diverse, it also means making our organizations more human, and that includes our NGOs. Even though sometimes we think that we're already human, I think we really need to reconsider that. And I'm going to part ways by paraphrasing the Chief Diversity Officer of Coca-Cola, just because I think it's a really great sentiment they said, which was, even if we get the tactics and logistics and the technology right, can we actually win if we don't get the people part right? And I think that's something we all need to actually have a good sit down with.
Okay, and then I'll go next. So in addition to what both of you, Mary and Kim have said, I'm just going to add to it that I envision a world where every woman's dream, and the last point that Pete made about 80%, the insight from Kimberly Clark that 80% of their products are bought by women. That tells me there is purchasing power, no matter how you want to see it. But then I just want a world. I want to see a world where that purchasing power is not just at the levels of, is translated to also enable the woman to become more productive as far as the sanitation economy is concerned. So taking on having access to the right support, especially capital, which we find to be one of the biggest challenges. So the ideas are there, the initiatives are there, the know-how sometimes is there, but then the capital to start up as the men do have more access to. More financing institutions will be willing to lend to women without asking, asking for an arm and a leg. The things that men traditionally can offer before they get access to this financing and funding opportunities, that women also have the same opportunities, really. That's the world I see. I'm looking forward to seeing that in the next 5 years, so to say, we would not be having this conversation in this light, but we'll be more or less celebrating how more women have, lined up and are being enabled, and there are affirmative actions with regards to how women can participate more effectively within the sanitation sector.
Great. Yeah, if I can just share a thought, being the chief scientist at KC, I think in equations. So I'll give you an equation to think about, which is human progress is equal to human potential minus obstacles. And I think that if we could remove the obstacles that keep women from achieving progress, I think all human potential far exceeds our imagination to even understand it. And the progress that we get that limits that potential is due to those obstacles. So what I think we need to focus on is identifying what are all the obstacles that keep people from living to their full potential and removing those obstacles. I would add one thing to that equation: human progress is equal to human potential minus obstacles plus encouragement. I think once in a while we just need to encourage each other to say, I trust you, you can do it, go make it happen. I think there's a real difference between having a seat at the table, a voice at the table, and a decision at the table, and, one of the things I wonder about is how our society, I wonder how many Alberta Einsteins have been suppressed by our society for the last 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 100,000 years, whatever it's been. And so going forward, that's really, my vision is that, anthropologists tell us if we want to change the culture, we have to change the stories that we tell and the heroes and heroines that we hold up. And I'd like to see us hold up as many Alberta Einsteins as we hold up Albert Einsteins. And that's really how we moved forward as a species. We're all in this together. None of us are as smart as all of us. So let's make it happen.
Yes, no, thank you all so much for that. I think, so much inspiration and momentum that we can take it from this time into the future. I think personally, I am all about sort of kind of to your point, Pete, we want to lift each other up. And I think sometimes that sentiment has, the idea of suppressing and kind of infighting has, been internalized by a lot of women. And I think I would love to see that gone, right? Like I would love to see women supporting women. And I would love to see, in terms of representations, in terms of pipelines, like we have, hundreds of toothbrushes on the market. We have hundreds of different cars on the market. Like, why are menstrual health products only these two main functions, right? Like in my head, like that is such an awesome opportunity for innovation, and an opportunity for women to disrupt the industry, as well as in general in the workplace, seeing more women support each other is sort of my vision for the future. And it's been incredible sharing this time and space with you all. I know from the toilet board side, we're really excited to continue the conversation in terms of, working with the Innovation Lab with Kimberly Clark, seeing what this first pilot looks like and moving into our next version of the Innovation Lab next year. I know, working with Wash Pals and the Iris Group is going to be really exciting to sort of see what collaboration could emerge from there. Kim with Flush, really excited to stay in touch in terms of the findings and how we can support your research. And then Ada, we would love to kind of be in touch with you about your network and sort of how we could plug in and support the network. I personally believe that there's a lot of opportunity to continue the bridge of the African diaspora and kind of how we can support, one another around the world and how we can continue doing that. So I would love to remain in touch